This program is sponsored by Auckland City Council. 56,827. The number of businesses in Auckland City. That's 15% of all New Zealand businesses.
Visitors to Auckland, welcome to my home city. Let me reassure you that the weather is not normally this bad, not even in July. But let me equally reassure you this is a really good day to be inside a windowless convention centre. I'm going to try to sum up in about 10 or 11 minutes probably what David has already spent a lot of time with you on, and I'm conscious that at the end of the day you're probably overflowing with information, and speakers late in the piece are in real danger of repeating what you've already heard. Consequently, most of what I will say will be on the first of the 4 points that David finished with, which is about what government should be doing in the area of trade negotiation, and just bring you up to speed with some of the things that are happening there. I agree with much of what David is saying. I don't agree that we're not giving urgency. The urgency, however, for a small economy often comes from our side rather than the side of the much larger market and country that you're negotiating with. Let me just set the thing in context if it hasn't been already today. Obviously, over the last 50 years, Asia has evolved as the most economically dynamic region of the world. Its economies have grown much faster than the world's average. Its share of world trade has grown from 15% in 1948 to 27% in 1996, and then up again in the last 10 years to 34% in 2006. All of this means that Asia looms much larger for New Zealand than it did traditionally, and that is reflected in the fact that in Asia now there are 12 of our top 20 trading partners and just under 40% of New Zealand's total trade. Our economies are to a large extent complementary, though our ability to play to our agricultural strength has to a degree been blocked by a high level of agricultural protectionism of some of our key markets such as Japan and the Republic of Korea, and our potentially key markets such as India. We've sought to develop new opportunities for trade, working multilaterally, regionally and bilaterally. Our first priority has been the World Trade Organization and the current Doha development agenda. And I want to talk about that for a little time because it has major implications for our trade generally, but also for our trade with Asia. As a small country, we naturally have a very strong interest in a world trading system that is rules-based and has a disputes procedure which enables us to compel larger countries to follow the rules. The multilateral system allows us to negotiate for the elimination of export subsidies and the lessening of domestic subsidies on agriculture to reduce unfair competition. Only through a multilateral round can we achieve those particular objectives. The round also potentially allows us to utilise international leverage to bring down in an across-the-board manner, but including Asia, high tariffs on agricultural and industrial products, and to open up new trade and services. The failure of the G4 countries to reach agreement a fortnight ago at Potsdam was a serious blow to the hopes that the Doha round might be completed this year. The G4 process, by which 4 key players, the European Union, the United States, Brazil and India, sought to resolve differences and find convergence for moving the round forward, is probably dead. But the round itself, I want to emphasise, is still very much alive, reverting to using the negotiating committees in Geneva for agricultural market access and for non-agriculture market access to seek agreement. Next week, the chairs of both of the negotiating groups, and that includes Crawford Faulkner, our ambassador to Geneva, who chairs the Agricultural Committee, will release texts setting out proposals for concluding agreement in their respective areas. These will be debated the week after that, followed by the summer recess in August in the Northern Hemisphere, where countries can consider their positions, and will resume an intensive text-based process in early September, interestingly at exactly the same time as the APEC leaders meeting will be taking place in Sydney. So can the Geneva process work when the G4 process, and before that the so-called Green Room, which New Zealand participates in, a Green Room of 24 member countries, can the Geneva process work when those other processes have failed to reach agreement? And my answer to that, I guess, has to be perhaps, if there is the political will and the flexibility and a realisation that every country loses if the round fails. Maybe the G4 countries and others will find it easier to make concessions under the cover of the multilateral process than in the small group process, where they might be held responsible more directly by constituencies, their domestic and vested interest constituencies, for the outcomes of that process. Last week we held in Cairns the meeting of the APEC ministers responsible for trade. At that meeting I called for and secured in the APEC Doha statement a commitment by the 21 member countries, and those countries, remember, are responsible for 50% of world trade, a commitment to engage actively and constructively with the negotiating group chairs to seek a final agreement. That is set out in the statement made collectively by all of us. In the end, however, actions will need to match words for this to happen. The focus at Cairns was exclusively on Plan A Doha round outcome. If, however, this is not possible, is there a Plan B? Last year in Hanoi, APEC leaders placed on the APEC agenda for the very first time discussion of a free trade agreement for Asia Pacific. This should be seen, I hasten to add, as complementary to, rather than an alternative to, Doha. It is in fact not a radical departure from the original vision of APEC in 1989, reinforced in 1994 by the Bogor goals of regional integration and free and open trade and investment in the Asia-Pacific region. New Zealand has just had its individual action plan reviewed by international experts. We have already met 11 of the 13 Bogor goals and were deemed to be on track to meeting the final 2. But there are obviously big challenges in pulling together diverse countries, including China, Taiwan and the United States, and resolving differences between them in order to achieve a free trade area. This will allow us to take our commercial relationship with China to a new high level with benefits to traders in both of our countries. We're also exploring ways in which we can advance our economic relationship with Japan and Korea, our 3rd and 6th largest export markets respectively. With Japan, we are at the moment participating in a working group, an economic working group made up from both countries, reviewing the relationship following the agreement between Prime Ministers Clark and former Prime Minister Koizumi to reinvigorate the trade and economic relationship between our two countries. With Korea, we're also participating in a joint study into the merits of an economic partnership agreement, an EPA, which will report by November of this year. In both countries, agricultural protectionism has traditionally stood in the way of negotiating an EPA. But in each country, an ageing farmer demographic and growing need for agricultural reform means that New Zealand has the potential, through an EPA, to assist both the process of reform and has sufficiently differentiated products not to represent the competitive threat sometimes feared. My sense is that we will move forward, first with Korea in respect to an EPA following its agreement with the United States, which still has to be ratified by the Congress, but in each case there will be challenges to overcome. India should also be mentioned in this regard. Earlier this year, in a meeting I had with Kamal, the Commerce Minister, he agreed in principle to establish a joint study into a possible free trade agreement. India is one of our fastest growing markets, albeit from a low base. It's also one of our few trading partners where, when you look at the list of our 10 major export products, food and beverage hardly exists on that list because of the high level of protectionism in those areas. Trade negotiations are important in opening doors for greater trading access, but much more needs to be done if New Zealand companies are to take advantage of the opportunities that are so created. To enhance our connectivity to the region, we've been working to increase New Zealand's footprint in the region through targeted deployment of personnel from agencies which include, of course, Foreign Affairs and Trade, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, Education and Customs in key Asia-Pacific countries. Initiatives associated with the Export Year are also aimed to assist New Zealand businesses to identify opportunities in export markets, especially Asia. A nearly $24 million increase in funding in the budget will strengthen New Zealand Trade and Enterprise's presence in the region, with 5 more offices in China, 1 more office in India, and New Zealand concept centres in both China and Japan. The expansion will also see the successful Beach Years program extended into China and India. In all of this, the government is committed to working closely with business to open markets, to help build capacity and capabilities, and to provide information and contacts. Working together in a New Zealand Inc. approach, we can ensure that the list of New Zealand companies exporting successfully into Asia continues to grow. Can I finally congratulate the Asia New Zealand Foundation, the host of this summit, for its advocacy and educational role for Asia in New Zealand and for New Zealand within Asia. This summit has produced an excellent lineup of speakers. It's produced, as I can see here, an excellent attendance, and I understand that the discussion through the day has been very good, if not a little exhausting. Can I thank you for showing your interest by attending this summit? Can I wish you a successful conclusion to your conference and a very safe trip back home. Thank you very much.
This program was sponsored by Auckland City Council. 9,461. The number of businesses in the Central Business District. 78,480. The number of people who work in those businesses.